Behind the golden gates of Windsor Castle, where centuries of tradition meet modern royal duties, an extraordinary woman was about to step into a role that would bridge the sacred and the secular, bringing together faith, service, and the future of the monarchy in ways no one could have predicted. The morning mist clung to the ancient stones of Windsor Castle, like a whisper from centuries past. Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood at the tall windows of the private drawing room, watching the early light dance across the manicured gardens. Her fingers traced the edge of her pearl necklace, a gesture that had become second nature during moments of quiet reflection. Today was different from the usual royal engagements that filled her calendar. Today she and William would welcome Dame Sarah Mullally, the Bishop of London, for what promised to be far more than a ceremonial visit. The sound of footsteps on the polished marble floors announced William's arrival. The Prince of Wales entered with his characteristic blend of formality and warmth, his navy suit impeccably tailored, yet his expression carrying the genuine enthusiasm that had endeared him to the British public. He moved to stand beside Catherine, their shoulders almost touching as they both gazed out at the morning landscape. "The gardens look particularly beautiful today," William observed, his voice carrying that distinctive tone that somehow managed to be both regal and conversational. "Mother would have loved this view." Catherine nodded, understanding the weight behind his words. Princess Diana's legacy continued to influence their approach to royal duties, particularly when it came to connecting with people from all walks of life. Today's meeting with Dame Sarah represented exactly the kind of meaningful engagement that Diana had championed, one that went beyond mere protocol to address real issues affecting real people. "Tell me again about Dame Sarah's work with the homeless shelters in East London," Catherine said, turning from the window to face her husband. Her eyes, always expressive, showed genuine interest rather than the polite curiosity that often characterized royal conversations. William smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. "She's been working there for over 15 years, long before she became Bishop of London. Started as a volunteer, actually, while she was still practicing medicine. Can you imagine? A doctor who gave up her medical practice to work with the church, only to end up running programs that probably helped more people than she ever could have in a hospital."
The respect in his voice was unmistakable.
Both William and Catherine had learned early in their royal careers to distinguish between people who sought their attention for personal gain and those who genuinely dedicated their lives to service. Dame Sarah clearly fell into the latter category. A gentle knock at the door interrupted their conversation. James, their private secretary, entered with the measured pace that characterized all royal household staff. His expression was professional but warm, reflecting the more relaxed atmosphere that William and Catherine had cultivated in their private offices. "Your Royal Highnesses, Dame Sarah Mullally has arrived. She's currently in the blue drawing room, reviewing the materials you requested regarding the shelter expansion project." "Excellent," William replied, straightening his tie with practiced ease. "We'll join her shortly. Has she been offered refreshments?" "Yes, sir. Tea and biscuits have been served. Dame Sarah mentioned she was quite impressed with the historical artifacts in the room, particularly the Gainsborough portraits." Catherine exchanged a glance with William. They had specifically chosen the blue drawing room for this meeting, knowing that Dame Sarah had studied art history before entering the medical field. These small gestures of consideration had become their trademark approach to royal hospitality, learning about their guests' interests and finding ways to make them feel genuinely welcomed rather than simply received. As they made their way through the castle's corridors, their footsteps echoing softly against the ancient stones, Catherine found herself thinking about the unusual path that had led to this moment. Dame Sarah's story was remarkable by any standard. A successful medical career abandoned to pursue religious calling, followed by a steady rise through the Church of England hierarchy, all while maintaining hands-on involvement with charitable work that directly impacted London's most vulnerable populations. The blue drawing room lived up to its name, with rich sapphire curtains framing tall windows and elegant furniture arranged to encourage conversation rather than formal presentation. Dame Sarah stood near one of the Gainsborough portraits, her posture reflecting both reverence for the historical setting and confidence in her own right to be there. She was a woman in her early 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a simple but elegant style, wearing the purple shirt and clerical collar that marked her episcopal rank. When William and Catherine entered, Dame Sarah turned with a warm smile that immediately set the tone for what would be a genuine conversation rather than a ceremonial exchange. Her handshake was firm, her eye contact direct, and her greeting carried the perfect balance of respect for their positions and comfort with her own.
"Your Royal Highnesses, thank you so much for making time for this meeting."
I know your schedules are incredibly demanding, and I don't take this opportunity lightly. The pleasure is entirely ours, Dame Sarah, Catherine replied, gesturing toward the comfortable seating area where tea had been arranged. We've been following your work with great interest, particularly the innovative programs you've developed in partnership with local councils and healthcare providers. As they settled into their chairs, the formal atmosphere quickly gave way to something more intimate and productive. Dame Sarah had brought a leather portfolio containing photographs, statistics, and personal stories from her work, but she set it aside, clearly preferring to begin with direct conversation. I hope you'll forgive me for being direct, she said, accepting a cup of tea from Catherine. But I've found that royal visits sometimes become more about the visit itself than about the work being discussed.
I'd love to hear about your genuine interest in housing issues and how you see the monarchy's role in addressing social problems.
William leaned forward slightly, his expression showing both surprise and appreciation for her directness. That's exactly the kind of honesty we need more of in these conversations. Catherine and I have been discussing this at length. How can we use our positions to create real change rather than just raising awareness? The awareness piece is important, Catherine added, but you're right that it can't be the end goal. We've seen too many situations where royal attention creates a brief spotlight that fades without creating lasting impact. Dame Sarah nodded thoughtfully. The homeless population in London has grown by 30% over the past 5 years. We're not just talking about rough sleepers, though that's certainly part of the crisis. We're seeing families with children, elderly people, veterans, people with jobs who simply can't afford housing. The shelter system is overwhelmed, and traditional approaches aren't working. She paused, studying their faces to gauge their reaction. What she saw there seemed to encourage her to continue with even greater candor. I've been working on a proposal that would require significant political support, substantial funding, and most importantly, a shift in public perception about who deserves help and why. It's ambitious to the point of seeming impossible, which is why I hope to discuss it with you today. William set down his teacup, his full attention now focused on Dame Sarah. We're listening. The idea is to create what I'm calling dignity villages, not temporary shelters, but actual communities where people can rebuild their lives while maintaining their dignity and autonomy. Each village would include not just housing, but job training facilities, healthcare services, childcare, even small businesses run by residents themselves. Catherine's eyes lit up with genuine excitement. That sounds similar to some of the community development projects we've seen in Canada and Australia. Are you thinking of adapting those models to the UK context? Exactly, but with some crucial differences. Most importantly, these wouldn't be government-run facilities. They'd be partnerships between the church, local councils, private investors, and the residents themselves. People wouldn't just be housed, they'd be stakeholders in their own communities. The conversation continued for over an hour, moving seamlessly between practical details and broader philosophical questions about the role of charity versus systemic change. Dame Sarah's proposal was indeed ambitious, requiring coordination between multiple government departments, significant private investment, and a level of public support that would be challenging to achieve. But as William and Catherine listened, asked questions, and began to envision their potential role in supporting such an initiative, something remarkable happened. The formal royal engagement transformed into a genuine planning session, with all three participants contributing ideas, identifying potential obstacles, and beginning to sketch out strategies for moving forward. By the time their initial meeting concluded, Dame Sarah had not only presented her proposal, but had also gained two passionate advocates who possessed both the public platform and the private connections necessary to turn ambitious dreams into concrete reality. The seeds of something extraordinary had been planted in the elegant blue drawing room, and none of them could have predicted just how far those seeds would grow. 3 weeks after their initial meeting, Catherine found herself in the passenger seat of a modest sedan, travelling through the narrow streets of Whitechapel. This was not the usual royal motorcade with its security escorts and cleared routes. Instead, she had opted for what the palace staff called a quiet visit. No press, no official photographers. Just the Princess of Wales accompanying Dame Sarah on a tour of the existing shelter facilities that would serve as the foundation for their Dignity Villages project. The contrast between Windsor Castle and this part of London could not have been more stark. Here, the buildings pressed close together, their brick facades weathered by decades of London rain and soot. The streets bustled with activity. Vendors calling out in multiple languages, children playing around the edges of small parks. Elderly residents gathered on benches watching the world go by. Catherine had insisted on this visit despite the security complications it created, arguing that she could not effectively advocate for a project she had only seen in photographs and proposals. Dame Sarah navigated the streets with the confidence of someone who had been making this journey for years. She pointed out landmarks that told the story of the neighborhood's evolution. Former factories now converted to housing, new community centers built on sites that had once been derelict, small businesses that had grown from residents' initiatives to become neighborhood anchors. That corner shop belongs to Ahmed Rahman, Dame Sarah explained as they passed a small grocery store with colorful displays of fruits and vegetables spilling onto the sidewalk. He came here 12 years ago with nothing but a suitcase and a determination to build a better life for his family. Started by selling vegetables from a cart, saved every pound, eventually bought the lease on this building. Now he employs 6 people from the neighborhood and stays open late specifically to serve the shift workers who can't shop during regular hours. Catherine observed the shop through new eyes, noting the handwritten signs advertising services like money transfers and mobile phone top-ups alongside the traditional grocery items. He's essentially providing financial services too. When banks won't serve a community, residents create their own solutions. Ahmed cashes checks, helps people send money to family members abroad, even provides informal credit to regular customers who are short on funds before payday. He's not just running a business, he's providing essential infrastructure. They parked behind St. George, Margaret's Church, a Victorian building that had clearly seen better days, but radiated warmth and activity despite its worn exterior. The church served as headquarters for Dame Sarah's existing outreach programs, and Catherine could see why she had chosen this location as the model for her larger vision. Even from the outside, it was clear that this was a place where things happened. People coming and going, bulletin boards covered with notices and announcements, the sound of children's voices from what was obviously a daycare program. Inside, the church had been thoughtfully adapted to serve multiple functions while maintaining its sacred character. The main sanctuary remained intact, with its soaring Gothic arches and beautiful stained glass windows, but the side chapels had been converted into meeting rooms, counseling offices, and a small library. The basement housed a commercial kitchen that supplied meals not only to the church's programs, but to several smaller shelters throughout the area. Dame Sarah introduced Catherine to Maria Santos, the program coordinator who had become legendary among London's social service providers, for her ability to navigate bureaucratic obstacles and create solutions that actually worked for the people they were designed to serve.
Maria was a compact woman in her 40s with expressive dark eyes and the kind of energy that suggested she could accomplish more before lunch than most people managed in a full day.
Your Royal Highness, Maria said, her greeting respectful but not obsequious. Dame Sarah told me you wanted to see the real operation, not the cleaned-up version we usually show to visitors.
Catherine laughed, immediately warming to Maria's direct approach. Please, just call me Catherine while we're here. And yes, I want to understand how this really works, including the problems and frustrations that don't make it into the official reports. What followed was a tour unlike any royal visit in recent memory. Instead of carefully orchestrated presentations, Catherine found herself in the basement kitchen helping to prepare lunch while Maria explained the complex logistics of feeding 200 people daily with a budget that would barely cover groceries for an average family. She learned about the delicate negotiations required to coordinate with local government services, the challenge of helping people navigate immigration status issues, and the heartbreaking reality of turning people away when space and resources simply weren't available. In the computer room, she met James Wilson, a former investment banker who had lost his job, his home, and nearly his life to addiction, before finding his way to St. Margaret's programs. Now 18 months clean and sober, James managed the digital literacy program that helped shelter residents develop the computer skills necessary for modern employment. His story was both inspiring and sobering, a reminder that anyone could find themselves in need of help, and that recovery was possible, but never simple or guaranteed. The hardest part, James explained as he showed Catherine the refurbished computers that local businesses had donated, isn't learning to use the technology, it's rebuilding confidence. When you've been sleeping rough for months, when you've been turned away from job after job, when people look at you like you're invisible, convincing yourself that you deserve another chance is the biggest hurdle. Catherine spent nearly an hour with James and the program participants, listening to their stories and beginning to understand the psychological barriers that made traditional approaches to homelessness so inadequate. These weren't people who lacked intelligence or motivation. They were individuals who had been worn down by a system that seemed designed to keep them trapped in cycles of dependency and despair. The visit to the actual shelter facility was even more revealing. Located in a converted warehouse several blocks from the church, it provided temporary housing for 48 people in conditions that were clean and safe but hardly dignified. Men and women were separated into different sections. Families were given slightly larger spaces partitioned by hanging curtains, and everyone shared bathroom and kitchen facilities that were functional but institutional. Dame Sarah walked through the facility with Catherine, not hiding the limitations and compromises that defined daily life there. "This is exactly what we're trying to move beyond," she explained. "These people aren't just grateful for a roof over their heads, they're human beings who deserve privacy, autonomy, and the opportunity to rebuild their lives with dignity intact." They met Sarah Chen, a young mother with 2 small children who had been staying at the shelter for 3 months while trying to save enough money for a security deposit on a rental flat. Despite working 2 part-time jobs, the combination of childcare costs and London's astronomical housing prices made it nearly impossible for her to escape the shelter system. "I know I'm lucky to have this place," Sarah told Catherine, her voice carrying a mixture of gratitude and frustration. "But my children ask me every day when we're going home. How do I explain to a 5-year-old that this is home, but only temporarily, and I don't know where home will be next month?" Catherine knelt down to talk with Sarah's children, her natural warmth immediately putting them at ease. As she listened to them describe their drawings of the house we're going to have someday, she felt a deep anger at a system that forced families to live in such uncertainty. These children were bright and curious and full of hope, but they were also learning lessons about instability and dependence that no child should have to absorb. The conversation with Sarah Chen continued over tea in the shelter's common room, and Catherine found herself taking notes as Sarah described the maze of bureaucratic requirements that kept her trapped in temporary housing. Different agencies had different qualification criteria. Waiting lists were measured in months or years, and the application processes seemed designed to discourage rather than assist people seeking help. "What would make the biggest difference?" Catherine asked. "If you could change one thing about the system, what would it be?" Sarah thought for a moment. "Treating us like people instead of problems. Right now, every interaction with housing services or benefits officers starts with the assumption that we're trying to cheat the system. We have to prove over and over again that we deserve help, that we're working hard enough, that we're grateful enough. It's exhausting and humiliating." As the day progressed, Catherine began to understand why Dame Sarah's Dignity Villages concept was so revolutionary. Instead of warehousing people in temporary facilities while they navigated complex bureaucracies, the villages would provide stable housing immediately, along with the support services and community connections that enabled people to rebuild their lives at their own pace. The final stop was a small flat that had been secured through one of the church's housing programs. Thomas Murphy, a veteran in his 60s, had moved there 6 months earlier after spending nearly 2 years in various shelter facilities. The flat was modest: 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, a living room just large enough for a sofa and television. But it was clearly home in a way that no shelter could ever be. "The difference isn't just having your own key," Thomas explained as he showed Catherine around the space he had gradually furnished with items from charity shops and donations from church members. "It's being able to shut the door and know that nobody's going to wake you up for a bed check. Nobody's going to search through your belongings. Nobody's going to ask you to leave because your time is up." Thomas had been a carpenter before a back injury ended his career and started the slide toward homelessness. Now he was slowly building a small business repairing furniture and doing odd jobs for neighbors.
The stability of having permanent housing had made it possible for him to invest in tools, establish a reputation for reliable work, and begin planning for the future again.
Dame Sarah's new idea. These villages she's talking about, that could have saved me 2 years of my life, he said.
"Not that I'm not grateful for the help I got, but if I'd been able to move straight from losing my flat to a place like that, I never would have lost my tools, never would have had to start over from nothing."
As Catherine and Dame Sarah drove back through London's early evening traffic, both women were quiet, processing what they had seen and heard.
The statistics and proposals they had discussed in the elegant surroundings of Windsor Castle had taken on human faces and personal stories. The need was even greater than the numbers suggested, and the potential for meaningful change was both more urgent and more complex than either of them had fully grasped. "Thank you for today," Catherine finally said. "I know it wasn't easy to arrange, and I'm sure some people were uncomfortable having me see the real conditions rather than a sanitized version. Actually, everyone I spoke with was eager to show you the reality of their situations. There's a widespread feeling that royal visits usually result in nice photographs and positive publicity, but that the actual problems remain unchanged. People are hoping that your involvement might be different." Catherine understood the weight of that hope and the responsibility it placed on her shoulders. The next phase of their collaboration would require her to use her platform not just to raise awareness, but to advocate for specific policy changes and funding commitments that could transform Dame Sarah's vision into reality. It would mean taking political risks and making long-term commitments that went far beyond the usual scope of royal charitable work. But as she thought about Sarah Chen's children drawing pictures of their dream house, and Thomas Murphy carefully rebuilding his life in his small flat, and James Wilson helping other people rediscover their own worth and potential, Catherine knew that some risks were worth taking. The question was no longer whether she and William should support Dame Sarah's project, but how quickly they could help make it happen. 6 months later, Catherine stood on a muddy construction site in Barking, East London, wearing Wellington boots and a hard hat that bore the distinctive feathers of the Prince of Wales emblem. Around her, the first Dignity Village was taking shape, not yet the thriving community that Dame Sarah had envisioned, but no longer just an ambitious dream discussed in palace drawing rooms. The transformation had required more political maneuvering, financial creativity, and personal commitment than any of them had anticipated. But here they were, watching foundations being poured and infrastructure taking form. William approached from the side office, a converted shipping container that served as headquarters for the project coordination team. His own hard hat sat at a slightly crooked angle, and his usually immaculate appearance showed the effects of a morning spent reviewing construction plans with contractors, architects, and community organizers. Behind him walked Dame Sarah, now sporting a fluorescent safety vest over her clerical collar, deep in conversation with Marcus Thompson, a formerly homeless man who had become the project's first resident coordinator. "The drainage system is going to be more expensive than we budgeted," William announced without preamble, a slight frown creasing his forehead. "But Marcus has some ideas about how residents can contribute labor to offset the costs." Marcus stepped forward, his confidence a striking contrast to the hesitant manner Catherine remembered from their first meeting at St. Margaret's Shelter. 6 months of stable housing and meaningful work had transformed him from a man who barely made eye contact to someone comfortable presenting ideas to the future King of England. "We've got 12 residents with construction experience and another 8 who are willing to learn," Marcus explained. "If we can arrange proper training and certification, we can handle a significant portion of the landscaping and finishing work ourselves. It reduces costs and gives people marketable skills they can use for future employment." Catherine nodded approvingly. This was exactly the kind of innovative thinking that set the Dignity Villages apart from traditional housing projects. Instead of treating residents as passive recipients of charity, the model encouraged active participation in creating and maintaining their own community. "What about safety regulations and insurance?" she asked. "I assume there are legal complications with having untrained residents doing construction work?" Dame Sarah smiled. "Actually, that's where our partnership with the local college has been invaluable. They've agreed to provide certified training programs on site so residents can earn legitimate qualifications while contributing to the project. It's taken months to navigate the bureaucracy, but we now have official approval for what amounts to a construction apprenticeship program." The sound of machinery interrupted their conversation as a crane began positioning prefabricated housing units on foundations that had cured over the past month. These weren't the utilitarian boxes that characterized most social housing projects, but thoughtfully designed homes with private entrances, small gardens, and architectural details that emphasized dignity and permanence. Catherine watched as the first unit settled into place, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The months following her visit to the Whitechapel shelters had been a whirlwind of meetings, negotiations, and careful political choreography. William had used his connections with business leaders to secure private investment. Catherine had leveraged her relationships with charitable foundations to provide bridging funds. Dame Sarah had navigated the complex web of government agencies, local councils, and church bureaucracies that all needed to approve various aspects of the project. The breakthrough had come when they realized that traditional funding approaches would never be sufficient. Instead of seeking a single large donor or government program, they had created what their financial advisors called a mixed economy approach, combining private investment, charitable donations, resident contributions, and innovative partnerships with educational institutions and local businesses. "Your Royal Highnesses," called a voice from across the construction site. Catherine turned to see Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the project's social services coordinator, approaching with a tablet in her hands and excitement in her expression. "I just received confirmation from the Department of Housing. Our application for the pilot program expansion has been approved. We're going to get funding for 3 additional villages." The news sent a wave of elation through the small group. From the beginning, they had envisioned the Dignity Villages as a model that could be replicated throughout the UK, but government support had seemed like an impossible dream given the political sensitivities around housing policy and social services. William shook Dr. Walsh's hand with genuine enthusiasm. Where are the proposed locations? Manchester, Cardiff, and Glasgow, she replied. Each city has identified sites and committed to providing local support services. The government funding will cover basic infrastructure, and they're encouraging us to develop local partnerships for ongoing operations. Dame Sarah looked almost stunned by the magnitude of what they had achieved. When I first proposed this idea, I thought we might eventually create one successful village that could serve as a demonstration project. The possibility of having 4 operational communities within 2 years seemed completely unrealistic. What had begun as a conversation between 3 people in a palace drawing room was now a national initiative with government backing, private sector support, and most importantly, genuine enthusiasm from the communities it was designed to serve. A group of future residents had arrived for their scheduled tour of the construction site. Catherine recognized several faces from her visits to various London shelters over the past months. There was Sarah Chen, whose children had grown noticeably taller and more confident as their housing situation stabilized. Thomas Murphy walked with the aid of a cane now, his back problems having worsened, but his carpenter's eye was clearly evaluating the quality of construction work being performed. The community building should be finished next month, Marcus explained to the tour group, pointing toward a larger structure at the center of the village site. It'll have a shared kitchen for special events, meeting rooms, a small library, and space for the various programs Dame Sarah has been developing. James Wilson, the former investment banker who now coordinated digital literacy programs, raised his hand. What about internet access? I know several residents who are hoping to work remotely or start online businesses. High-speed broadband throughout the village, Dame Sarah replied. We learned from the existing shelter programs that internet access isn't a luxury. It's essential infrastructure for people trying to rebuild their lives in a digital economy. As the tour continued, Catherine found herself walking alongside Eleanor Price, an elderly woman whose story had particularly touched her during earlier meetings. Eleanor had worked as a school administrator for 30 years before a combination of health problems and housing market changes left her homeless in her late 60s.
The idea of someone Eleanor's age having to sleep in shelters and navigate the chaos of temporary accommodation systems seemed particularly cruel. How are you feeling about the move?
Catherine asked as they paused to watch workers installing solar panels on one of the housing units.
Eleanor's face lit up with a smile that seemed to take years off her appearance. Terrified and excited in equal measure, she admitted. I haven't had my own space in almost 3 years. The idea of being able to arrange furniture the way I like it, to cook my own meals when I want them, to have neighbors instead of temporary roommates, it's almost too good to believe. And the community aspects? Are you looking forward to being involved in the village activities? Oh yes, Eleanor replied with enthusiasm. I've already volunteered to help coordinate the literacy program for residents who need help with reading and writing. Dame Sarah thinks we might be able to establish partnerships with local schools so that residents can contribute to children's educational programs. While this was another aspect of the Dignity Villages concept that set it apart from traditional housing projects. The emphasis on residents as contributors rather than just beneficiaries. Instead of creating dependency, the villages were designed to help people rebuild not just their housing situations, but their sense of purpose and connection to the broader community. The afternoon progressed with visits to various aspects of the construction project, including the innovative water management system that would allow the village to be largely self-sufficient in terms of utilities, and the workshop spaces, where residents could develop small businesses or pursue vocational training. Each element of the village had been designed with input from future residents, ensuring that the final community would reflect the actual needs and preferences of the people who would call it home. As the day drew to a close, Catherine, William, and Dame Sarah gathered in the site office for a final review of the timeline and remaining challenges. The construction was proceeding on schedule. Resident selection and preparation programs were fully subscribed, and the partnership agreements that would support ongoing operations were falling into place. There's something I need to tell both of you, Dame Sarah said, her expression becoming more serious. This project has attracted attention from housing advocates and policy experts throughout Europe. I've received inquiries from organizations in France, Germany, and the Netherlands who want to adapt the Dignity Villages model for their own countries. William looked up from the construction schedule he had been reviewing. That's wonderful news. International expansion was always part of our long-term vision. It is wonderful, Dame Sarah agreed, but it also means that we're no longer just creating a local solution to a local problem. Whether we intended it or not, we've become a test case for a fundamentally different approach to social housing policy. The pressure to succeed is much greater than I initially anticipated. Catherine understood the weight of what Dame Sarah was expressing. Royal involvement in charitable projects always attracted attention, but this level of scrutiny meant that every aspect of their work would be analysed, critiqued, and potentially replicated or dismissed based on measurable outcomes. "Are you having second thoughts?" Catherine asked gently. Dame Sarah paused, looking out through the office windows at the construction site where their shared vision was becoming reality. Future residents were still walking around the site, some taking photographs, others deep in conversation with construction workers or program coordinators. "Not second thoughts about the project itself," she finally replied. "But I am feeling the responsibility more keenly than I expected. If this fails, if we can't demonstrate that the model works sustainably over the long term, then we may have inadvertently damaged the cause we're trying to advance." William set down the papers he had been holding and looked directly at Dame Sarah. "The alternative was to do nothing while we waited for perfect conditions or guaranteed outcomes. Yes, there are risks, but there are also 48 people who will have homes next month instead of shelter beds, and hundreds more who will have the same opportunity if our expansion plans work out. And even if some aspects don't work as planned," Catherine added, "we'll learn from the problems and adjust the model accordingly. The residents we've been working with aren't expecting perfection, they're expecting genuine effort and commitment to finding solutions." Dame Sarah nodded, her confidence visibly returning. "You're both right, of course. I suppose I'm feeling protective of something that has grown far beyond what any of us initially imagined." As they prepared to leave the construction site, Marcus Thompson appeared at the office door with a small group of future residents who wanted to express their gratitude for the day's tour and update. Catherine was struck by the transformation she observed not just in Marcus, but in all the residents who had been involved in the planning and development process. These were people who had regained not only hope for stable housing, but confidence in their ability to contribute meaningfully to their community. The drive back to London took them through neighbourhoods that told the story of urban development over several decades, from Victorian terraces to post-war council estates, to modern apartment complexes that housed the city's growing population of young professionals. Each area represented different approaches to housing policy and community development. Most of them focused primarily on providing shelter, rather than creating the conditions for people to rebuild their lives with dignity and tact. As their car moved through the evening traffic, Catherine reflected on how much her understanding of housing issues had deepened over the past months. What had begun as support for Dame Sarah's innovative proposal had evolved into a comprehensive education about social policy, community development, and the complex factors that could trap people in cycles of poverty and instability. But more than that, it had become a deeply personal journey that had connected her with individuals whose stories would stay with her long after the Dignity Villages were completed and occupied. Sarah Chan and her children, Thomas Murphy with his patient rebuilding of a carpentry business, Eleanor Price preparing to have her own space again after 3 years of temporary accommodations. These weren't abstract social problems, but real people whose lives had been transformed by the opportunity to start over with dignity and support. The first Dignity Village would open its doors in just 6 weeks, marking not the end of the project but the beginning of a new phase that would test whether their innovative approach could deliver on its promises. There would undoubtedly be challenges they hadn't anticipated, problems that would require creative solutions, and ongoing pressure to demonstrate measurable success. But as Catherine looked back at the construction lights illuminating the site where dreams were becoming reality, she felt confident that they had created something genuinely transformative. More than new housing, they had built a model for treating homeless individuals as whole human beings, deserving of dignity, autonomy, and the opportunity to contribute to their own communities. Whatever challenges lay ahead, that fundamental shift in approach represented a victory that no temporary setbacks could diminish.